Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. High-profile cases over executive power, election laws, and education funding have been flowing through state courts. That's putting the spotlight on a key judicial race in North Carolina. Republicans have a 5-2 majority on the state Supreme Court. They're hoping to strengthen that majority in November by winning a contested seat currently occupied by a Democrat. Democrats hope to reverse a trend of recent losses at the ballot box, starting on a long path to regaining control of the High Court. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran has been tracking the race, and he's here to break it down for us. Will, good to see you again.
Happy to be talking about it.
Will, before we get to the candidates, let's talk about the state of play on the state Supreme Court. Republicans have a majority. How did they get there?
So just to start from the very beginning, we elect our judges here in North Carolina. And starting after the 2016 elections, we started electing the Supreme Court justices and others using party labels. They used to be nonpartisan, but the legislature changed that so that people would know if the judges are Republicans or Democrats. And in both 2020 and in 2022, Republicans won every single judicial race on the ballot. This was huge for the GOP because, those years were also decent for Democrats in other races. Roy Cooper, a Democrat, won the governor's race in 2020, but voters wanted Republicans on the bench. And so that helped Republicans flip what had been a Democratic majority on the Supreme Court to what is now, as you said, this 5-2 Republican majority.
Now, when's the earliest that the Democrats might be able to retake control? I mean, that's probably why this is an important race to them too, right?
Exactly. There's only one race on the ballot, and with that 5-2 majority, obviously some simple math shows that Democrats cannot retake the majority in this election. But if they lose this race, if they're not able to defend the seat that they already have and it switches to a 6-1 GOP majority, that makes it even tougher for Democrats to take back that majority. But if they're able to hold on to that seat, they could potentially take back control in the 2028 elections when there are going to be 3 seats, basically half the court, up for re-election.
Now, you mentioned the detail about party labels on the ballot, but, judges are supposed to be impartial. Does the political makeup of the court even matter?
Yes, the political makeup of the court matters a lot, especially for the high-profile elections and political cases that the court hears. Whether or not a judge is a Republican or Democrat probably doesn't matter a ton when you have 2 business partners who are suing each other over a contract dispute. But when you have a case about gerrymandering and whether it is, too much in favor of one political party, or, you have a case about separation of powers and whether or not a certain power in state government should go to the Democratic governor or the Republican-led state legislature, as we've had a lot of for nearly a decade now, political labels of the judges really do frequently seem to determine how they rule on these cases. They are almost always along strict party lines whenever we have politically tinged cases like those.
And has that shown up in any recent cases?
Yes. When the Democrats held control of the Supreme Court up until 2022, there were several cases in which they ruled against the Republican state legislature on gerrymandering, on voter ID, some big cases like that. And then as soon as Republicans took over, they undid those rulings and said, never mind what we ruled previously, the legislature does get to win now. And in all of those rulings, both when it was Democrats in control and Republicans in control, it was always exactly along party lines how the votes broke down on the court.
Now, obviously, as you mentioned, redistricting is a big issue that could be before the court. Are there other issues that we could see before the Supreme Court?
Plenty, yeah. We haven't actually seen an abortion case go before the Supreme Court right now. We've had some abortion lawsuits. Those have all been in federal court. But particularly if the legislature were to try and write a new, even stricter abortion law in the future, that could certainly go before the state Supreme Court to decide. Plenty of other things. You mentioned education funding. There is a decades-long lawsuit here in North Carolina called the Leandro case that has been bouncing back from court to court to court since the 80s, I believe. And it's currently at the Supreme Court. Could be going back down to some other court, could be coming back up to the Supreme Court later. And that deals with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in funding for public schools, and whether or not the legislature can be ordered to pay this extra money. There are plenty of elections cases that we're going to see, both lawsuits that are currently pending over our elections laws, and also, frankly, who knows what will happen after these 2024 elections that we're about to have, and if anything that happens in North Carolina post-election or in the heat of the election might lead to lawsuits that the Supreme Court will take up in the future.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear about the candidates fighting for that Supreme Court seat. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the state Supreme Court. Will, the state Supreme Court race this November pits an incumbent Democrat against a Republican challenger. Let's start with the incumbent, Justice Allison Riggs. What's her background?
Yes, Allison Riggs was a longtime civil rights litigator based in Durham. She grew up in West Virginia, went to college at the University of Florida, but made her way up to Durham to work for the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, which is a pretty prominent social and civil rights group that does a lot of gerrymandering litigation, does a lot of voter ID lawsuits. She actually was a lead counsel that won in 2013, or against the 2013 voter ID law that North Carolina had originally passed. But it's not just North Carolina. They do litigation in plenty of other states. She eventually took over the leadership of that role until last year. Governor Roy Cooper appointed her to a seat that became open on the Court of Appeals. And then just a couple months later, a seat became open on the state Supreme Court when Justice Michael Morgan stepped down to run for governor. And Cooper appointed Riggs to that seat on the Supreme Court. So she has been on the court for about a year now. Is both the least experienced justice and the youngest. She's only 43 years old, which is pretty rare for a judge.
And she's up against Republican Judge Jefferson Griffin. Tell us about him.
Jefferson Griffin is also 43 years old. So we have this matchup between two pretty young judges here who want this 8-year term on the Supreme Court here. Jefferson Griffin, he was a former trial court judge here in Wake County. Before that, he was a prosecutor in Wake County. He did some criminal defense work out in Kinston early in his career. He grew up in Nash County. He's currently on the Court of Appeals. He won a seat on the Court of Appeals in 2020 and is seeking a promotion here to the High Court.
Tell us where they stand on some of the key issues. What are their big differences in terms of judicial philosophy?
Yes, that is one thing that really, I think, sets the candidates apart. I interviewed both of them for this article. Judge Griffin told me that he is an originalist. He believes that if courts do too much to change how things operate, that can tend to be judicial activism. Courts need to be very conservative, not necessarily in a political sense, but just cautious on not making big changes, not making waves, and really trying to defer a lot to the legislature to really set policy and trying to just interpret law. I talked to Justice Riggs, who said that she is not an originalist. She believes that phrase is just kind of a code word for "we'll vote like a Republican." She said that she doesn't believe in ascribing to any sort of one-size-fits-all judicial philosophy, that you just need to be able to look at the facts of each individual case and make the best ruling based on what the Constitution says, what past state precedent says. And so there's definitely this very big difference in philosophy between the two of them on that. And then, of course, there's the political differences as well.
Now, in talking to them, do they talk about their positions on things like abortion or election laws, things like that?
Yes. Now, judges have to be careful not to comment on any specific cases that are before the court for obvious reasons. But, speaking in broad terms, they can let voters know kind of where they stand on things. And Riggs actually recently came out with a TV ad that is all about abortion and protecting women's rights. And I talked to her about it, and she said, this is something that I believe is enshrined in the Constitution. So, of course, I'm going to come out and say that I'm in support of women's rights. And, she pointed accurately that In plenty of other southern states, as stricter abortion laws have been implemented, it's been the courts that have had the final word on whether or not those new laws are going to be allowed to go into place. So, she is really focusing intently on that. Griffin didn't talk about it as much, but I do note he signed on to an opinion recently that declared that life begins at conception, which of course could be a baseline for a total ban on abortion. Now, he did not write that opinion himself, and in a kind of a rare move, that opinion was actually formally withdrawn by the state court commission after it started gaining some public attention and started making some political waves here. He said that he did support the decision to withdraw it, but couldn't comment further on that since judges are not permitted to comment on the private deliberations that go on behind the scenes.
Does Riggs benefit at all from being an incumbent?
Certainly. I think in any race, there's always a benefit to being an incumbent. Now, I think Griffin can say, yes, she may be the incumbent, but I've been a judge for almost a decade. He was first elected to be a trial court judge in Wake County back in 2015. She's been a judge for close to 2 years. And so, he can kind of counter that way. Yes, she's the one who's on the Supreme Court currently, but I have much more experience on the bench than she does. I don't know how much credence a lot of voters give to incumbency, especially in judicial races, but it is typically a help. I'll note that in North Carolina, voters typically tend to be a little bit more pro-Republican when they vote for judges than when they vote for other races. Like I said in 2020, we saw Roy Cooper won the governor's race by almost 5 percentage points. We have 10 races that make up the executive branch of state government, including the governor and plenty else. And Republicans won 6 of those 10, but they won all 8 of the judicial races that were on the ballot that same year. So there were plenty of people who were willing to vote for Democrats in other offices who either didn't vote for judges at all or voted for Republicans for judge.
Do you have any sense who's favored in this race at this point?
Well, because of all of that, it's a little hard to say. Maybe you give the edge to Griffin in a year when it's just a complete toss-up here in North Carolina, and you say, okay, it's going to be a tie race for president, tie race for governor. The edge probably goes to the Republican in a judicial race like this. But with everything we've seen from the governor's race, the polling that shows Josh Stein way, way, way ahead in that race for governor. Some polling that we've seen in the presidential race that shows that even though it's still really close, maybe Kamala Harris has an edge here by a few points. I think that's probably seen as pretty good news to the Democrats and, giving them a real hope that Riggs can hang on to her seat here.
Now, this isn't the only judicial race on the ballot. What else will voters find when they go to the polls?
Yes, there are tons of judicial races on the ballot this year. There are 3 seats on the Court of Appeals that are up for election, and that's the 15-person court that is between the trial court level and the Supreme Court. And then there are dozens and dozens of county-level district court and superior court judges who are on the ballot, depending on where you live in the state. If you want to find out more information about that, you can go to the State Board of Elections website. They have sample ballots up. You just have to put in your name, pick which voter you are that matches your name, and it'll pop up your sample ballot, and you can see every race that you're going to be able to vote on, whether that's county commissioners or Congress, judges, everything.
Going to be interesting to watch. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran for his preview of the state Supreme Court justice race. Go to the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.